Your view on that? Did Marco Rubio kind of come in and do a bit of a clean-up operation nearly on this when it was so badly received, that plan at the end of last week?
Hey, Katrina, I think he's doing his best. But as far as the origin of the document, I don't need to know where it started to know that this is a very pro-Russia proposal. And I think it might be getting a little better. My concern is that the interests of Donald Trump, the interests of America, and of course the interests of the Ukrainian people are not really aligned here. I mean, President Trump wants a quick deal, and I understand why. He wants a victory. But a quick deal is not necessarily in the best interest of America, right? We want to push back against our geopolitical enemies to show that we're not going to be steamrolled when, in fact, they advance aggressively on our allies. And you can believe China is watching to see how we would react toward an invasion of Taiwan. And then, of course, there's the Ukrainian people's interests here, which is most important. They would be capping their military at 600,000 troops. They would be relinquishing more land than Russia has even gained through its hostilities. And they would basically agree they would never seek entrance into NATO. And so it's very one-sided. And I really, really hope that we are not putting the short-term victory goal of President Trump over the interests of Ukraine and the American people.
And Joe, do you think the American people look at it like that, the way you are?
Well, I think there is a sort of very inward-facing, the sort of MAGA movement that just does not want us involved at all in any kind of international adventures. And then I think you have the more geopolitically minded interests who say, you know, it's not just about focusing on our domestic issues. If we ignore what's going out there in the world, well, there's going to be implications, perhaps not tomorrow, but next year and next decade and over the next century. And so I think people are split in terms of how much resources they want to invest, and of course, whether we get into a hot war with anybody. But I do think, putting aside the very inward-facing crowd, I think people agree that when there's an ally out there that we have protected for so long, the worst thing we can do is now basically just tap out.
Because, Joe, much polling in this country does show that there isn't support there for Russia, and recent polls have showed there isn't really much support for the White House position for Russia either.
Well, I think there's probably one of the few things that Americans can agree on is that there's not much love lost here for Russia. I think the question is, well, what do we do about that? Do we completely ignore what's happening on the other side of the world, or do we take steps to push back, even if not in direct aggression, but by doing things like supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression? And as far as the financial aspect, see, that doesn't bother me quite as much. Donald Trump was elected as a businessman, and I don't have a problem bringing financial type qualities to any kind of arrangement. I do wonder, though, about the ability of anything that Russia has to be involved with going forward, because Vladimir Putin, if nothing else, has shown over and over again that he cannot be trusted. So if we get into some kind of financial deal about seized Russian assets and how they'll be divvied out and put in some kind of a trust, that will be a debacle. So it's the practical aspect of it, more than the fact that it's a business type angle.
Okay. Now, we will get to all matters Venezuela in just a moment, but first, a federal judge has dismissed all of the charges that the Trump administration had brought against former FBI Director James Comey. The judge also dismissed charges brought against New York Attorney General Letitia James. U.S. District Court Judge Cameron Curry threw the cases out of court because he said the acting government prosecuting lawyer had not been legally appointed. Judge Curry said that Lindsay Halligan had been appointed by the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi when she did not have the authority to do so. Ms. Halligan had then charged Mr. Comey with lying to Congress during a 2020 hearing about the 2016 election, and New York Attorney General Letitia James had been charged with alleged mortgage fraud. Now, Judge Curry said that as Ms. Halligan was not a lawful acting attorney, she was not in a position to bring the charges, and so he dismissed without prejudice the cases against Jim Comey and Letitia James, who had prosecuted Donald Trump in New York. Now, the indictments were brought against both individuals just before the statute of limitations were due to expire, and both had pleaded not guilty. Now, both of them have been reacting to the ruling. Letitia James says, "I am heartened by today's victory, and grateful for the prayers and support that I've received from around the country. I remain fearless in the face of these baseless charges as I continue fighting for New Yorkers every single day. The former FBI director, James Comey, posted this reaction to one of his social media platforms.
Personally, obviously, but it matters most because a message has to be sent that the President of the United States cannot use the Department of Justice to target his political enemies. I don't care what your politics are, you have to see that as fundamentally un-American and a threat to the rule of law that keeps all of us free. I know that Donald Trump will probably come after me again, and my attitude is going to be the same. I'm innocent, I am not afraid, and I believe in an independent federal judiciary, the gift from our founders that protects us from a would-be tyrant.
Well, let's bring in our panel now, Joe Moreno and Amanda Renteria. Joe, you are a practicing attorney in Virginia where all of this has been happening. So I'm going to lean on your legal expertise for just a moment. These cases dismissed without prejudice, but they were filed so close to essentially the deadline for charges being brought. Is that likely to be the end of the matter, or could more charges be brought now against James Comey and Letitia James?
Hey, Katrina. Well, as far as the Comey case, which was done, as you point out, just within the 5-year limitation, I would argue, if I was a prosecutor, that the fact that the indictment was made within the 5 years tolls the 5-year period, and therefore you could bring the same charges by a subsequent U.S. attorney because they were, as you pointed out, dismissed without prejudice, which means they can be brought again. Now, of course, if I was on the defense side, I would say, oh, no, the statute of limitations applies. And just because it was kicked out on process grounds does not mean you can then revitalize it after the 5-year period has lapsed. And so I think you'd see arguments on both sides. It doesn't change the fact, especially in the Comey side, though, the Comey case, it was a really weak case. So I hope, for all of our sake, that we do not see this case again, because even if it does manage to get new life on procedural grounds, it will almost definitely fail on the merits.
And what about this lengthy piece that the judge said about the appointment of the interim Attorney General in the first place? I mean, he laid out a lot of law showing there are 120 days that a US Attorney General would have to appoint someone once the other person leaves, and this went way past that time. So why would the Attorney General have put someone in there when it would appear that the time frame for doing so is so clearly laid out in law?
Well, because the properly installed U.S. attorney in Virginia refused to bring the case, and they were desperate to do something before the 5-year statute of limitations lapsed. So they put in someone in the form of Lindsay Halligan with absolutely no federal prosecutorial experience. She's an insurance lawyer from Florida. So it just kind of reeks of desperation. And look, I hate to say this because I have a lot of former colleagues who are in well-placed positions in this Justice Department, but the ineptitude, it just baffles me how this entire thing was so botched, and that how it just, I think it shows that the way to fight against lawfare is to stop doing it. It's not to continue it. And so if there's any lesson to be learned here, it's that you do not use the Justice Department as a personal political weapon, no matter how much aggrieved Donald Trump feels. And I get it. The lawfare against him was horrible. But just doing the same thing to your own opponents is just, it's not going to work.
And of course, in taking those cases against James Comey and Letitia James, as we've said there, President Trump had been accused of prosecuting his political enemies. Now, retired Navy captain and U.S. Senator from Arizona, Mark Kelly, is now making the same accusation. The Pentagon has just said that it's investigating Senator Kelly for serious allegations of misconduct, less than a week after he took part in a video that reminded serving troops that they can refuse illegal orders. Senator Kelly appeared in a video with 5 other Democratic lawmakers who have served either in the military or in the intelligence community. The brief video, though, drew the rage from President Trump, who called last week for the lawmakers to be punished and suggested that they be executed, posting this message on his Truth Social platform and another that read, "Seditious behaviour punishable by death." The Secretary for Defence, or Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, today has posted to X saying The video made by the seditious six, as he's calling them, was despicable, reckless and false. Encouraging our warriors to ignore the orders of their commanders undermines every aspect of good order and discipline, he says. Their foolish screed sows doubt and confusion, which only puts our warriors in danger. Well, let's have a little reminder of just what was in that video featuring Senator Kelly and his colleagues.
Like us, you all swore an oath
to protect and defend this Constitution.
Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad, but from right here at home.
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
No one has to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution.
Well, Joe, you're also a military expert as well as a legal one. And the suggestion here from the Pentagon and the Secretary is that they will somehow reinstate Mark Kelly, who's a retired Navy captain, in order so that he could face a military law hearing. Can that actually be done? Is that a move that's practical or legal?
No, it's not. And look, I didn't like this video. I thought it was very condescending. I mean, every 18-year-old service member who enlists, one of the first things they're taught is to refuse illegal orders and respect the laws of war and the rules of engagement. So to hear a handful of politicians from Congress lecture us on that, I think is ridiculous. That being said, though, there's a difference between not liking something and it being a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You can recall a retiree if you found out that he or she did something when on active duty, and you can recall them to face a court-martial. You cannot punish them for something they've done post-retirement that has nothing to do with their military service. So it might look very unseemly for a former retired officer to say something like this, and I don't like it. I think it's tacky and I think it's condescending. But no, there's no practical means of pulling Senator Kelly back on active duty to then court-martial him.
I mean, Joe, that's the point, isn't it? This is being described as a war on drugs all of the time.
Yeah, Katrina, I mean, look, I'm going to look at this from the perspective of a lawyer, and you touched on it in your intro, right? The administration does not have a real legal hook in order to support this endeavor. There's no declaration of war, certainly. Nobody wants that. And as far as the authorization of military force that Congress passed way back after 9/11, that talks about fighting Islamic fundamentalist terrorist groups. So the idea of now trying to name a Venezuelan group as a terrorist one in order to sort of shoehorn it into that AUMF, it's a stretch. And so what I'd like to see is if we're going to do anything in that region, especially if we're going to engage Venezuelan forces proper and instigate regime change, I want to see not just a well-defined mission with a timeline and metrics and congressional oversight. I want to see a legal basis for what exactly we're doing there. If we don't have either one of those things, we're going to wind up with the same kind of mess we had in Iraq and Afghanistan of 20 years without a plan.
The counterpoint to that, Joe, I suppose, is that I've heard from some military experts, if you do all of that, you lose the element of surprise for whatever your operation might be.
Well, you typically have 30 days in order to go back to Congress and to request retroactive permission and a plan if you have to act quickly. And so that's more than enough time here for the administration to take quick, decisive action. You can brief a select number of members of Congress to keep it a very tight circle. So I get that argument, but that is not an excuse to bypass the legal structures we have in place to govern when exactly our military can be used for purposes other than self-defense. And this is not self-defense.